She is probably the most iconic African woman who ever lived.
Images evoke a sense of ancient Egypt more than this, the face of Nefertiti.
In 1912, a German archaeologist named Ludwig Borchardt is excavating the ruins of a sculptor's workshop in the ancient Egyptian city of Amarna, roughly 200 miles south of Cairo. The workshop belonged to a man named Thutmose, the court sculptor of Pharaoh Akhenaten, one of the most controversial rulers in Egyptian history. Borchardt's team has been digging for weeks, pulling out fragments of statues, plaster casts, and broken pottery. And then on December 6th, buried in the rubble of a room that had collapsed 3,000 years ago, they find something that stops the entire excavation: a painted limestone bust of a woman, about 19 inches tall, weighing roughly 44 pounds. One eye is intact, a rock crystal iris set into painted black wax. The other eye socket is empty, the long, elegant neck, the geometric crown, the painted skin, the face. Borchardt writes in his field diary that evening 5 words, describing it as useless. See it. He is looking at the bust of Nefertiti. It will become, alongside the Mona Lisa, one of the 2 most famous portraits ever created. It will be called the most beautiful face in the ancient world. It will draw millions of visitors to Berlin's Neues Museum, where it sits today behind climate-controlled glass. And for 97 years, everyone who looks at it will assume they are seeing Nefertiti's real face. They are not. In 2009, a team of researchers put the bust inside a CT scanner, the same kind of machine hospitals use to scan human bodies, and looked through the surface. What they found underneath the painted stucco exterior is a completely different face. Thinner, older, with wrinkles around the mouth, a bump on the nose, less prominent cheekbones, a face that looks nothing like the perfect, symmetrical icon the world has been admiring for a century. The face the world calls Nefertiti is a mask, and the real woman is underneath. Nefertiti is one of the most famous women in all of human history, which is remarkable considering how little we actually know about her. She was the great royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who ruled Egypt from approximately 1353 to 1336 BC. Akhenaten is the pharaoh who upended 3,000 years of Egyptian religion by declaring that there was only one god, the sun disk Aten, and that all other gods were false. It was arguably the first experiment in monotheism in recorded history. It failed spectacularly. After Akhenaten's death, the priests of the old gods erased his name from every monument, abandoned his capital city of Amarna, and restored the traditional religion. His successor was his son, a boy we know as Tutankhamun. Nefertiti was Akhenaten's partner in all of this. She appears beside him in reliefs and carvings as a co-ruler, not just a consort. In some images, she is shown smiting enemies, a role traditionally reserved for the pharaoh alone. In others, she is depicted making offerings to the Aten alongside Akhenaten as an equal, the sun's rays extending tiny hands that hold the Ankh, the symbol of life, to both of them simultaneously. No Egyptian queen before or after held such visible power. Some Egyptologists believe she may have ruled Egypt herself after Akhenaten's death, possibly under the names Smenkhkare or Neferneferuaten, names that appear in the royal records of the period, but whose owners have never been conclusively identified. And then she vanishes. Around year 12 of Akhenaten's 17-year reign, Nefertiti disappears from the historical record. Her name stops appearing on monuments, her image stops appearing in carvings, she is simply gone. Some scholars believe she died, possibly of plague, which was ravaging the Eastern Mediterranean at the time. Others believe she was exiled or demoted. Others believe she assumed a new identity and continued ruling under a different name. The truth is, we do not know. After 3,000 years, the most powerful woman in ancient Egypt simply walked off the stage of history and never came back. Her mummy has never been definitively identified. In 2010, DNA analysis of mummies found in the Valley of the Kings identified a mummy known as the Younger Lady from Tomb KV35 as the mother of Tutankhamun. Since Tutankhamun's mother was likely Nefertiti, or possibly one of Akhenaten's other wives, this mummy became a candidate. But the identification remains contested. The Younger Lady's face shows severe damage. Her jaw is partially destroyed and her left eye socket is crushed, which some researchers believe was inflicted post-mortem, possibly by the priests who sought to erase Akhenaten's legacy. If the Younger Lady is Nefertiti, then her body was mutilated by the same people who erased her name from every wall. Her name, incidentally, means the beautiful one has come. And the bust that Thutmose carved in his workshop is the only surviving portrait that shows us what she looked like, or rather what someone wanted us to think she looked like. And then there is the bust that Borchardt found in 1912 and smuggled out of Egypt to Germany, where it has remained ever since, despite decades of Egyptian demands for its return. The circumstances of its discovery are worth telling because they illuminate just how extraordinary this object is. Borchardt's team was excavating the workshop of Thutmose, the royal sculptor, in the ruins of Amarna, the capital city that Akhenaten had built from scratch for his new religion, and that was abandoned almost immediately after his death. The workshop was filled with sculptors' models, test pieces, practice heads, reference busts that Thutmose used to guide the creation of official royal portraits. Most were damaged, most were fragments, And then, in a room that Borchardt designated as Room 19, the team found the bust of Nefertiti lying on its side in the rubble, face down, covered in 3,000 years of dust and collapsed ceiling. When Borchardt cleaned it and saw what he had found, he allegedly told his team, "There is no use in describing it. You have to see it." His field diary entry for December 6, 1912 contains measurements, a sketch, and 5 words that became famous among Egyptologists. Lebensgrosses bemaltes Buste der Königin, life-sized painted bust of the queen. The understatement of the century. The bust that shows a woman of impossible perfection, symmetrical features, flawless skin, an expression of serene authority that is not diminished in 3,000 years. A face so perfect it looks designed. Because it was. The bust is made of a limestone core covered with layers of painted stucco, a plaster-like material made from gypsum, lime, and water. The stucco was applied over the limestone, smoothed, and then painted with the colors we see today. The blue crown, the warm skin tones, the red lips, the dark eye makeup. It is the stucco surface, the outer layer, that gives the bust its famous appearance. And it is the limestone core underneath that tells a different story. In 2006 and again in 2009, a team led by Dr. Alexander Huppertz, director of the Imaging Science Institute at the Charité Hospital in Berlin, conducted high-resolution computed tomography scans of the Nefertiti bust. The scans were performed at night after the museum closed to avoid disturbing the display. The bust was carefully transported from its glass case to a medical-grade Siemens CT scanner, the same machine used to scan living patients for tumors, fractures, and internal injuries. The scanner generated over 0 cross-sectional images of the bust, each capturing a thin slice of the object from crown to base. Each slice was less than a millimeter thick. When assembled digitally, these slices created a complete three-dimensional model of the bust's interior. Every layer, every void, every air pocket, every internal structure visible for the first time in 3 millennia. The resolution was fine enough to see individual brushstrokes in the painted surface and chisel marks in the limestone core. What Huppertz found beneath the stucco changed everything historians thought they knew about the bust, and it was not just the face. The CT scan revealed that the bust was constructed in a more complex way than anyone had realized. The limestone core was carved first as a complete portrait. Then Thutmose applied multiple layers of stucco. Not a single layer, but several, built up over time, each one modifying the features slightly. The stucco layers are not uniform in thickness. They are thicker around the nose, where the bump was covered, thicker at the cheekbones, where height was added, and thinner around the forehead and crown, where less modification was needed. This layered approach means Thutmose did not simply slap plaster over the stone and start fresh. He refined the face gradually, iteration by iteration, moving it further from reality and closer to perfection with each layer. The inner face, Thutmose's original carving, shows features that are measurably different from the painted surface the world sees. The limestone core, Thutmose's original carving created before the stucco was applied, shows a face that is measurably different from the painted surface the world sees. The differences are subtle but unmistakable. The inner face has slightly less prominent cheekbones. The nose has a small bump on the bridge that does not appear on the smooth outer surface. There are fine creases at the corners of the mouth, lines that suggest age, or at least maturity, that the idealized outer face does not show. The corners of the eyes show slight depressions. The overall impression is of a real face, a face with the small imperfections and asymmetries that every living human being has. Thutmose carved that real face first. He captured what Nefertiti actually looked like, or at least what the model sitting in front of him looked like, and then he covered it with stucco. He smoothed out the bump on the nose. He filled in the creases at the mouth. He raised the cheekbones. He created the perfect, symmetrical, ageless face that the world would see for 3,000 years. The bust is not a portrait. It is a portrait with a mask on top. The real Nefertiti is underneath. And in 2024, AI facial reconstruction technology took this one step further. Using the CT scan data as a foundation, researchers applied machine learning algorithms trained on thousands of ancient Egyptian skeletal reconstructions to generate the most detailed rendering ever created of what Nefertiti might have actually looked like, stripped of the idealization that Thutmose applied. The process involved feeding the AI the three-dimensional shape of the inner limestone face, the real face, along with anthropometric data from Egyptian skeletal remains of the same period. The AI estimated soft tissue depth at over 100 facial landmarks, predicted skin texture based on the climate and sun exposure of the Amarna region, and generated a photorealistic rendering that accounts for muscle structure, subcutaneous fat distribution, and the natural asymmetry of a living human face. The AI reconstructed face shows a woman who is still striking, still beautiful by any standard, but human, imperfect, asymmetrical in the way all real faces are. Real. A woman in her 30s or early 40s with olive-toned skin showing the effects of decades under the Egyptian sun, faint lines around the eyes, slight creasing at the corners of the mouth, a nose with character, not the impossibly smooth slope of the stucco version, but a nose with a gentle ridge that gives the face depth and Individuality, dark, intelligent eyes. A strong jaw that speaks of authority. She looks like someone you could meet, someone you could have a conversation with, someone who would look you in the eye and expect you to hold her gaze. Not a goddess, a queen. A human being who lived in the desert heat and ruled an empire and bore 6 daughters and navigated the most dangerous court politics in the ancient world and aged like everyone else. The contrast between the AI reconstruction and the bust is jarring. The bust is ethereal, otherworldly, impossibly perfect. The AI face is powerful, human, and unmistakably real. They are recognizably the same person. The bone structure matches, the proportions match, but the emotional effect is completely different. The bust makes you admire from a distance. The AI face makes you feel like she is standing in front of you. The difference between the real face and the idealized face raises a question that goes far beyond art history. Why did Thutmose modify her face? And how common was this practice? The answer to the second question is extremely common. In fact, idealizing royal portraits was the norm in ancient Egypt, not the exception. For 3,000 years, from the Old Kingdom to the Ptolemaic period, pharaohs and queens were depicted as young, strong, and perfect regardless of their actual age, health, or appearance. Statues of Ramesses II show him as a muscular young man with perfectly symmetrical features even when he was well into his 80s, riddled with arthritis and missing most of his teeth. His mummy, which was CT scanned in 2006, reveals a stooped, fragile man with a hooked nose, a receding jaw, and severe spinal curvature. The statue and the mummy look like 2 different people, and in a sense they are. One is the man, the other is the god he was supposed to be. Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh who ruled Egypt for over 20 years, was depicted in her earlier statues with feminine features, but later had herself shown with a male body and the traditional false beard of a pharaoh. Not because she believed she was male, but because the image of kingship in Egypt was male, and she needed to look like a king to be accepted as one. The practice was not vanity, it was theology. The pharaoh was a living god. A god does not age, a god does not have a bump on the nose, a god does not show the wear of decades under the sun, a god is perfect, and the artists who served the pharaoh were expected to produce images that reflected divine perfection, not human reality. To show the pharaoh's real face would be to admit that the god-king was mortal. And in its Egypt, where the entire social, political, and economic order rested on the divinity of the ruler, that admission was unthinkable. But here is what makes the Nefertiti bust different from every other Egyptian royal portrait. Thutmose did not simply carve an idealized version of the queen, he carved the real version first. He looked at her, or at a death mask, or at a life cast, depending on which theory you accept, and he observed her face with the precision of a forensic scientist. He captured every imperfection, the bump on the bridge of the nose, the asymmetry of the cheekbones, the creases at the corners of the mouth, the slight depressions at the corners of the eyes, in hard limestone that would survive millennia. And then he deliberately covered it up, layer by layer of stucco, smoothing, raising, perfecting. He built a second face on top of the first. He preserved the real woman inside the statue while presenting the idealized woman to the world. That is not just artistic convention. That is an act of documentation disguised as an act of idealization. Thutmose preserved both versions, the one the court wanted to see, and the one that was true, the mask and the face, the goddess and the woman, both frozen in the same object for 3,000 years, waiting for a machine that could see through stone. The question is whether he did it on purpose. Did Thutmose know that someday, somehow, someone would be able to see through the stucco to the limestone underneath? Did he intend for the real face to survive alongside the idealized one? Or was it simply a technical artifact of his sculpting process? Carve first, refine later, and the inner face was never meant to be seen. We will never know Thutmose's intent. He died 3,000 years ago in a city that was abandoned and buried in sand within a generation of his death. But the AI reconstruction has given us something that no amount of historical speculation could provide. A face. A real face. The face of a woman who ruled Egypt during one of its most turbulent periods, who helped launch the world's first monotheistic revolution, whose name was erased from monuments by her enemies, and whose true appearance was hidden inside a statue for 3 millennia. And there is one more detail that the CT scans revealed that has generated intense debate among Egyptologists: the empty left eye socket. The bust's right eye is intact, a beautiful rock crystal and wax iris that gives the statue its famously lifelike gaze, but the left eye socket is empty. For decades, scholars assumed the eye had simply fallen out or been lost, but the CT scan showed that the eye socket was never prepared to receive an iris. There is no attachment structure, no adhesive residue, no damage consistent with an eye that was once present and fell out. The left eye was never there. Thutmose deliberately left it empty. In 3,000 years, no one had thought to question why. Everyone assumed it was damage, breakage, time. The CT scan proved them all wrong. The empty eye socket is not an accident. It is a choice. Why? The most widely accepted theory is that the bust was a sculptor's model, a modellbüste, a reference piece used in the workshop to guide the creation of other portraits of the queen. As a workshop model, it would not need both eyes. One completed eye demonstrated the technique of iris insertion, and the other was left unfinished because it was unnecessary for a reference piece that would never leave the studio. This theory is supported by the fact that the bust was found in Thutmose's workshop alongside dozens of other sculptors' models, not in a temple or a palace. But other researchers have proposed more provocative explanations. Some suggest the missing eye represents a physical condition Nefertiti had in real life, an injury, a cataract, or a disease that cost her vision in one eye. If the bust was a realistic workshop model, it might have recorded the queen's actual appearance, including a blind or damaged eye. Others have proposed a religious interpretation. In Egyptian theology, the left eye was the eye of Horus, associated with the moon god Thoth and with the concept of divine wisdom and healing. A missing left eye could signify that Nefertiti had ascended to a status beyond normal human vision, that she could see what mortals could not. And there is a third theory, rarely discussed but impossible to ignore once you hear it. The ancient Egyptians practiced a ritual called the opening of the mouth, a ceremony performed on statues and mummies to animate them, to give them life force, to make them vessels for the spirit of the person they represented. The insertion of eyes was a critical step in this ceremony. A statue without eyes was considered dormant, alive in potential but not yet awakened. If Thutmose left the eye out deliberately, the bust was never activated, never alive, never a vessel. Perhaps because completing it would have meant something that Thutmose, or Nefertiti herself, was not ready for. The AI analysis cannot determine which theory is correct, but it has confirmed that the eye was never there, not lost, not broken, not stolen, intentionally absent. Another mystery hidden inside a statue that keeps revealing secrets every time we look deeper. There is a dimension to this story that goes beyond archaeology and into geopolitics, and it would be dishonest to leave it out, because the question of who owns Nefertiti's real face is not just an academic debate. It is a diplomatic crisis that has been burning for over a century. The bust of Nefertiti is in Berlin. Egypt wants it back. And the CT scan findings have turned a long simmering dispute into a full-blown confrontation. When Borchardt excavated the bust in 1912, Egypt was not an independent country. It was under British military occupation. The Egyptian Antiquities Division was run by a French official named Gustave Lefebvre. Under the rules of the time, rules written by European colonial powers to benefit European colonial powers, excavated artifacts were divided between the Egyptian government and the excavating team. The division was supposed to be fair. It was not. Borchardt was supposed to show Lefebvre the bust and negotiate which party would keep it. What happened at that meeting has been disputed for over a century. According to Egyptian officials and several contemporaneous accounts, Borchardt deliberately downplayed the bust's importance. One version says he showed Lefebvre a poorly lit photograph that made the bust look like a damaged, uninteresting artifact. Another says he may have partially covered the bust with mud or cloth to obscure its painted surface. A third version, from Borchardt's own notes, suggests he simply described it in vague terms, a painted queen's bust, without revealing its extraordinary quality. Whatever happened in that room, Germany got the bust. And when the painted surface was cleaned and the full beauty of Nefertiti was revealed to the public for the first time, the Egyptians realized what they had lost. The recriminations began immediately and have never stopped. Egypt has formally requested the bust's return multiple times in 1925, in 1929, in 1933, and repeatedly from the 1950s through the present day. Hitler personally promised to return it to Egypt as a diplomatic gesture in the 1930s, but never followed through. After World War II, the bust was recovered from a salt mine in Thuringia, where it had been hidden from Allied bombing, and was returned to the Berlin Museum. Germany's position has been consistent. The division was legal under the laws of the time. The bust has been in German possession for over a century, and returning it would set a precedent that could empty every museum in Europe. Egypt's position is equally firm. The bust was obtained through deception. It belongs to the Egyptian people, and keeping it is an ongoing act of colonial theft. The CT scan added fuel to the fire. When the hidden face was revealed, showing that the bust contains not just an idealized surface, but a realistic portrait of the real Nefertiti preserved beneath, Egyptian authorities argued that the bust is even more valuable and culturally significant than previously understood, and that its return is more urgent than ever. Zahi Hawass, the former Egyptian minister of antiquities who has led the repatriation campaign with characteristic ferocity, was blunt. This is not a decorative object. This is the real face of one of the greatest queens in Egyptian history. Hidden inside a statue that was taken from us under false pretenses. It belongs in Egypt, it belongs in Cairo, and we will not stop asking until it comes home. Germany has not budged. The bust remains in room 210 of the Neues Museum, and the real face of Nefertiti remains trapped inside a statue in a foreign country, 3,000 miles from the desert where she lived and ruled and died. Every year, more than 1 million people walk into room 2. 10 of the Neues Museum in Berlin stand in front of the Nefertiti bust and admire what they believe is the face of an ancient Egyptian queen. They photograph the smooth skin, the high cheekbones, the geometric crown, the one crystal eye that seems to follow you around the room. They post the photo on Instagram. They buy the postcard in the gift shop. And they walk away believing they have seen Nefertiti. They have not. What they have seen is a 3,000-year-old beauty filter, the world's oldest Photoshop. A sculpted mask applied by a court artist whose job was to make the queen look divine, not human. The real Nefertiti, the woman who lived and breathed and ruled and aged and probably laughed and argued and worried about her daughters and navigated the most dangerous political revolution in Egyptian history, is inside the statue, sealed beneath layers of stucco, invisible to every visitor who has ever stood in that room. The CT scanner saw her, the AI reconstructed her, and what they found is not a goddess. It is a woman, a remarkable, powerful, formidable woman, but a woman nonetheless. With a bump on her nose that her sculptor decided the world should not see, with lines around her mouth that her sculptor decided to erase, with asymmetrical features that her sculptor decided to correct, with a face that was perfectly real and perfectly human, and that someone 3,000 years ago decided was not perfect enough. There is something profoundly modern in that. In an age of filters, Facetune, and AI-generated beauty standards, we are shocked to discover that ancient Egyptians did exactly the same thing. They took a real face and made it impossible. They took a human being and made her a brand. They took the truth and buried it beneath a surface that was easier to worship. The only difference is that Thutmose used stucco and we use pixels. The impulse is identical, and it is 3,000 years old. But Thutmose did something our filters do not do. He preserved the original underneath. Whether by accident or by design, he kept the real face intact inside the stone. He did not destroy it. He did not sand it smooth. He carved every imperfection into limestone that would survive 3 millennia, and then he covered it with a mask that would survive equally long. Both faces have endured, the one the world wanted and the one that was true. The Mona Lisa hides another woman beneath the paint. The Nefertiti bust hides another face beneath the stucco. The Great Sphinx of Giza may have had a different head originally, recarved from a larger lion's head, according to some geologists. The terracotta warriors of Xi'an were originally painted in vivid colors that faded within minutes of excavation. The Venus de Milo may have held objects in her now missing arms that would completely change our interpretation of what she represents. How many other masterpieces in the world's museums are hiding something beneath their surface? How many are wearing masks that we have not yet learned to see through? The AI does not care about beauty standards. It does not care about divine perfection. It does not care about what a court wanted its queen to look like. It sees through stucco the way it sees through data, looking for what is there, not what someone wanted to be there. And every time we point it at a famous face, it finds the same thing underneath. A real person. Imperfect. Asymmetrical. Human. More interesting than the mask. More beautiful in a way than the perfection that was designed to replace them. Subscribe, because every time we scan deeper, we find another secret. And the next one might change what we thought we knew about history's most famous faces. The next file is on your screen.